Okay, so speaking of media and more, obviously we've been tracking the Rogan story, the Neil Young element, but to me, the most disturbing part has been watching the vultures in cable news and in media who have hated Rogan for years take the gloves off and throw everything at Spotify in order to try and destroy him. And chief among them has been CNN, who are the most disgraceful, I have difficult words to describe them in the attacks that they have wrought upon Rogan, upon Spotify, and more. And they recently had a panel on CNN, which really gives away the entire game about why they hate Rogan so much in the first place. Let's take a listen.
Kat, you wrote on Twitter about Spotify. You went viral for a comment about it yesterday. Tell us your point of view first about this Spotify mess, because it's really dominated the week.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about the backlash against Spotify vis-a-vis Joe Rogan is that people are fundamentally angry about not being able to stop his audience from wanting news that is bad for them, wanting something that's bad for them. So, we're all haunted by the specter of this guy who's listening to Joe Rogan and internalizing this bad information and making bad choices as a result. But
bad information, bad choices as a result. Who are you to decide what bad information is? And I love haunted by the specter. I, sheepishly was like, I'm haunted by the specter that anybody watches that. Yeah, that has any power. That haunts me to my day. When I go to sleep, the last thing I think is, oh my God, I can't believe people are watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox News and consuming this garbage. I mean, ask yourself this. You know those annoying relatives out there, how many have them been brainwashed by cable? How many have been brainwashed in the same combative and adversarial way by Rogan? We all know the answer to that question. And this is really pernicious, Krystal, because we're watching this happen in real time, morph from a media effort to cap a opponent, essentially, much more so than it has any real objection on vaccines. I highlighted yesterday, one of our listeners, thank you to this person, sent me this, but Move On, I don't know, what do you call them? Like a resistance organization?
I mean,
it's hard to describe.
I used to like them back when they were like opponents of the Bush War. That was like some of my first political awakening. Right. Now they're just, resistance.
Okay, so Move On and some group called Ultraviolet, which is some abortion organization.
It's an offspring of Move On. I think they had their same mailing list, and they use it for feminists, pro-choice, that sort of
stuff. So
the
feminist group feminist group Ultraviolet and Move On teamed up, and they sent out an email to millions of people yesterday. This is the title. Sign the petition. Remove racist and conspiracy theorist Joe Rogan's podcast from Spotify now. Dear Move On member, Spotify has an incredible number of podcasts, but Spotify has an issue with disinformation and extremism. The streaming service's #1 podcaster is none other than the racist, transphobic, conspiracy theorist Joe Rogan. Geez, that's the trifecta. Jeez. Last week, Neil Young posted a letter. Sign Ultraviolet's petition now to stop the spread of disinformation and remove the Joe Rogan experience. This has merged into a full-fledged cancellation campaign. This is what I was talking about in my monologue yesterday. There are big interests here that are all at play. And I think that CNN and them, especially Brian Stelter is the chief among them, has been declaring war on Rogan, both on their Twitter feeds, in terms of their cable news appearances and more. There was another one yesterday, Krystal, which we wanted to highlight here, of Oliver Darcy talking about how Rogan doesn't fact-check his information like they fact-checked their information. They say this stuff with a straight face. Take a listen.
And yet Joe Rogan has the #1 podcast on Spotify. Millions of people listen to him. Audiences are choosing him. Why? What is it about him? Clearly he connects.
Yeah, I think it's maybe that it's an unscripted conversation. He does have these people on who are not really given platforms in major media institutions, and that's because they are, spouting all these sort of anti-vaccine rhetoric things that are not in line with the public health consensus. Look, at CNN, we have a health desk. We make sure that the information that we provide viewers is accurate. Most major outlets have some sort of system in place to do that. Joe Rogan's having a conversation with people that, he finds interesting, and they might attract eyeballs or I guess ears, but they are not reflecting the public health consensus, and I think that's really what's unnerved a lot of people over the past few weeks.
Yes, Krystal. CNN, of course, is famous for putting on only the best experts with the best information, and they have the good information, not the bad information.
They've been right about everything during the pandemic, right, Saagar? Let alone Russiagate, let alone the wars.
Yeah, this is, Matt Stoller tweeted something this morning. Let me go ahead and read this. I just think it was so perfect, which was basically, unless Joe Rogan goes ahead and starts a few wars and prints trillions of dollars to his friends, then we can cancel him. Until then, F off. And that is perfectly well said. When CNN fires all their CIA intelligence ghouls and others from their network, and they stop promoting, absolutely bonkers anti-science stuff when it comes to COVID, not to mention the Russiagate lies, not to mention so much of the pernicious forces that have been released across this country, then perhaps we can have a conversation around a freaking comedy podcast. But until then, shut up. I mean, watching this war really take hold. I mean, I'm seeing very prominent people saying, now let's start with Joe Rogan's advertisers, posting a list of the advertisers trying to incite a boycott. I've watched this whole thing happen with Fox News in the past. And don't you for a second think that this isn't going to have an effect. I've tried to explain this yesterday. Yeah, Spotify might back Rogan. What about the next one? You think they're going to buy him? No way.
That's the thing to me.
Yeah.
Rogan's going to be fine.
Of course, and he would be regardless.
Even if, and I don't think this will happen, but even if Spotify was like, you're in violation of your contract,
he'd be like,
his viewers are going to follow him. He's going to be perfectly fine. And he also, I think, has capitalism on his side because he's made Spotify a lot of money, brought over a lot of new listeners and new users of their platform, not just to listen to him, but to listen to other content that is there and engage with their other podcasts that are there. So I think he has capitalism on his side in this particular interaction. The problem is that, as you were saying, what about the next person who's coming up who doesn't have 11 million, listeners in their audience, who's new, who's just getting their start, who's a little bit edgy? Are they going to take a risk on them? Probably not. That's where this stuff gets really pernicious because people who say basically like, oh, cancel culture isn't real, they'll point to somebody like Rogan and like, oh yeah, we canceled Rogan so hard that he still has 11 million listeners to his podcast. The problem isn't actually those people who are kind of too big to cancel. The problem is all the folks who come after that, who, may not have such a clear capitalist win written all over them, and companies will just do the cost-benefit calculation and decide, you know what, this isn't worth the headache, this isn't ultimately worth the risk. And so you end up with the pipeline that's coming up being totally sanitized, being totally establishment-friendly. It's only, you're allowed to be wrong, but only in the ways that are, good for the establishment, good for making new wars or like giving more billions to rich people. Those are the types of people who are allowed to be wrong. Stephen Hayes is just the absolute perfect example here. I mean, we talked about this yesterday. NBC News hires this guy. He was the worst, the number one proponent of this fake link between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. But does he need to be censored? Is anyone boycotting him? Are they putting trigger warnings on his appearances? Are they even disclosing that he was part of that? No. Rachel Maddow's another perfect example.
That's right.
The crap that she sowed. I mean, she was so incredibly damaging to the liberal mind because she is so influential and because she was so relentless with this Russiagate nonsense. It really has poisoned people who believed in her and who trusted her to believe these wild conspiracies and have this totally insane view of the threat from Russia in their heads, which is completely screwed up our geopolitics and created very dangerous situations and made it less likely that we can solve the problem in Ukraine through peaceful and diplomatic means. So those things are incredibly damaging. They're, the absolute definition of misinformation, and no one is worried about that whatsoever. I think it's really the part that I'm really disgusted with right now is there's this new effort, not only is Rogan like anti-vax, but now he's an open racist. And I saw this So I mentioned yesterday there was this New York Times reporter who tweeted what I thought was a reasonable thought. He said, Joe Rogan is what he is. We in the media might want to spend more time thinking about why so many people trust him instead of us. Good point.
Yeah.
Reasonable line of inquiry.
I don't know who you are out there, but thanks for being one of the sane ones.
Yeah, so that's a New York Times reporter, Matthew Rosenberg, and in the replies, his colleague, Nicole Hannah-Jones,
of course,
says, with respect, I don't get this. We need to understand why millions of Americans don't mind the open racism. It's not a mystery, been reporting on it for years, so what do we do with that? And actually, first of all, in her reply, she's not just attacking Rogan, which is one thing. She's saying everybody who listens to him and enjoys his podcast is good with open racism and is basically a racist themselves.
Yes.
And her question there, what do we do with that, is actually a really important one. Because if your operating political assumption is just that all these people are racist, so what are you going to do? Well, that lets everybody with power off the hook from actually trying to do anything.
Right.
That's how you end up with, Democrats losing Virginia and going, well, even though this is a state that just elected Biden by 10 points and has elected Democrats up and down the ballot, what are you going to do? It's just the people got super racist, and so, we can't possibly win against this, and so we're insulated from any sort of criticism of what we've ultimately been engaged in.
That's a good point.
That's why that's all so incredibly, ultimately pernicious and disturbing.
No, it is, and I really want to emphasize this, which is that if you're coming up right now, this is a shot at all of us. I was thinking about it. My monologue today is about boosters for children. If we were trying to get bought by Spotify, that would be an idiot to do that monologue, right? It's definitely going to get whatever labeled or whatever. I don't care, because that's why we do this show. But you have to make that conscious choice. Now, we're okay. We designed the business with our premium stuff in order to make sure that we don't care whatsoever. But not a lot of people have that luxury.
Yeah.
Well, if you were not starting out 3 years ago and you're like, oh man, this is the only way to get it done, what would we do? I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And this is what it's all about. It's about encouraging people down the line, the next generation, to self-censor, to stop themselves from creating stuff not only that people want, but covering the stories that are necessary to a real public and free society. So if people want to know why I'm personally so animated about this, is I know what it does to the people out there who don't have the same freedom that we do. I know how much they have to censor themselves. How many famous people out there agree with Rogan, agree with us? They can't say a word because they're going to lose their Hollywood deal or whatever.
Yeah, and that is the thing too, is if you're going to engage in something that's interesting and take risks, sometimes you're going to get things wrong.
Yes.
And, I do think that those two podcasts with Malone and McCullough, like, those guys are very good at sowing misinformation about the vaccine and only talking about the risks and cherry picking the evidence and just getting some things that are just completely blatantly wrong. For example, as we talked to Dr. Prasad about, hydroxychloroquine does not work.
Well, the one that really bothered me is when McCullough said that you can't get COVID twice. And I was like, it's just like flat
not
wrong.
True.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we personally know people that's
right.
the case. But again, if you're going to engage in this world, sometimes you're going to get things wrong. What do we do then? What's the process for saying, you know what, here's how I'm going to change things moving forward. Here's how I'm going to adjust to this learning experience. And a society with no path to like forgiveness or learning, where you have to be right 100% and you have to have been right your whole life, that's an ugly place to be. And no one in this entire country is ever going to meet that standard.
That's a great point.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.